I'm telling you this because someone needs to know what's really out there, prowling in the darkness around that lighthouse. What I saw that night wasn't supposed to exist, but it was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced. My hands are still shaking as I write this, 3 days later. My name is James. I'm 40 years old, a marine biologist from Tampa who spent 2 decades studying coastal ecosystems. I'm not some kid with an overactive imagination or a drunk looking for attention. I'm a scientist trained to observe and document. What happened to me at the St. Augustine Lighthouse changed everything I thought I knew about this world. It started as a routine research trip. I'd received a grant to study the nocturnal marine life patterns around historical coastal structures, and the St. Augustine Lighthouse was perfect for my needs. The 165-foot black and white striped tower has stood there since 1874, casting its beam across the Atlantic for over a century. I'd arranged special permission to conduct my observations from midnight until dawn, when the facility was closed to tourists. I arrived at the lighthouse grounds around 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October. The weather forecast had called for clear skies, but as I pulled into the empty parking lot, I noticed thick clouds rolling in from the ocean. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of salt and something else, something organic and rotten that I couldn't quite identify. The temperature had dropped significantly, and I pulled my jacket tighter as I gathered my equipment from the trunk. The lighthouse keeper's house stood dark and silent beside the tower. I'd met the daytime staff earlier that week, and they'd given me a key to the entrance gate and warned me about the strange sounds people sometimes reported at night. They'd laughed it off as old building noises and wildlife, but there was something in their eyes that suggested they didn't entirely believe their own explanations. I set up my equipment on the rocky beach area east of the lighthouse, positioning my night vision cameras and motion sensors to capture footage of any marine animals that might approach the shore during high tide. The beam from the lighthouse swept overhead every 30 seconds, briefly illuminating the churning ocean before plunging everything back into darkness. That's when I first heard it, a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. It wasn't the cry of a fox or the howl of a dog. It was deeper, more primal, and it seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The sound came from somewhere inland, back toward the old keeper's house and the dense maritime forest that surrounded the property. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was wind through the trees or some large animal passing through. But my instincts, honed by years of field work in remote locations, were screaming at me that something was very wrong. I checked my phone, no signal. The clouds had completely covered the sky now, and a light rain began to fall. I decided to move my base of operations closer to the lighthouse tower itself, where I'd have better visibility and the massive iron door as a potential shelter if the weather got worse. As I packed up my equipment, I heard movement in the underbrush behind me. Heavy footfalls, too large to be a deer or wild boar. They were deliberate, pacing. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the rain. For just a second, I saw eyes reflecting back at me from the tree line. But they were too high off the ground, maybe 7 feet up. They weren't the eyes of any animal I'd ever studied. They were yellowish green and filled with an intelligence that was terrifying in its intensity. The thing moved, and I caught a glimpse of its silhouette against the distant glow of the city. It was massive, easily over 8 feet tall, with a hunched posture that somehow still seemed powerful and poised to strike. The shape was wrong, too broad in the shoulders, too long in the limbs. And then it made that sound again, that deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but every survival instinct I possessed told me to get away from that thing. I grabbed my bag and sprinted toward the lighthouse, my boots slipping on the wet grass. Behind me, I heard it give chase, its footfalls thundering against the earth. It was fast, impossibly fast. The lighthouse door was maybe 50 yards away, but it felt like miles. My lungs burned as I pushed myself harder than I'd ever run in my life. The beam swept overhead, and in that brief flash of light, I saw my shadow on the ground in front of me, and another shadow, much larger, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. I reached the lighthouse entrance and fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get it in the lock. I could hear the thing breathing now, a wet, rasping sound punctuated by low growls. The key turned, and I threw myself inside, slamming the heavy iron door behind me just as something massive collided with it from the outside. The impact was so powerful it rattled the hinges. I threw the bolt lock and backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The door shuddered as the thing outside hit it again and again, each impact accompanied by that horrific growling. Through the small window in the door, I could see movement, a massive, dark shape circling, searching for another way in. I grabbed my phone, but there was still no signal inside the thick lighthouse walls. I was alone, trapped, with that thing outside. The logical part of my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Large bear? No, bears don't move like that. Escaped exotic animal? Nothing I'd ever seen in any zoo moved with that combination of animal fury and calculated intelligence. The attacks on the door stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I stood in the darkness at the base of the spiral staircase, my flashlight the only source of light, trying to control my breathing and listen for any sign of movement outside. That's when I heard the scratching. It started at the door, then moved around the perimeter of the lighthouse. The thing was testing the structure, looking for weak points. The scratching was accompanied by a sniffing sound, and I realized with horror that it was tracking my scent. I made a decision. I couldn't stay at ground level. If that thing found a way in, I'd be trapped. I started climbing the 219 steps of the spiral staircase, moving as quietly as I could. My flashlight beam played across the old brick walls as I ascended, and I tried not to think about what might be happening below. I was about halfway up when I heard glass breaking. One of the lower windows, the thing had found a way in. The sound of its movements echoed up the stairwell, and I could hear it sniffing, tracking me. I abandoned any attempt at stealth and raced up the remaining steps, my legs burning with the effort. I reached the watchroom just below the lantern room and slammed the hatch door shut behind me, securing it with the old latch. Through the windows, I could see the rain had become a downpour, and lightning was starting to flash over the ocean. The lighthouse beam continued its steady rotation above me, indifferent to the horror unfolding below. I could hear it on the stairs now, climbing with a strange, loping gait. It was coming for me, and I had nowhere left to run. I looked around the watchroom frantically, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. There was an old fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, a wooden chair, and some maintenance tools in a cabinet. The sound stopped just below the hatch. I could hear breathing, deep, wet, and ragged. Then came the scratching at the hatch door, methodical and patient. The latch was old, and I didn't know how long it would hold. In desperation, I climbed the final ladder into the lantern room itself, where the massive Fresnel lens rotated continuously. The room was all glass and metal, offering a 360-degree view of the grounds below. And that's when I saw them. There were more of them. In the lightning flashes, I could see 3 more shapes moving through the grounds below. They were similar to the one that had chased me, but slightly smaller. They moved in a coordinated pattern, like a pack. The one in the lighthouse, the largest one, was their leader. The hatch below me exploded open with a sound like a gunshot. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and positioned myself at the top of the ladder, ready to defend myself with the only weapon I had. The head that emerged through the hatch was something out of my worst nightmares. It was wolf-like but far too large, with an elongated snout filled with teeth that looked like they could tear through bone. Its fur was matted and black, glistening with rain. But it was the eyes that held me frozen. Those yellow-green eyes that held an almost human awareness. A calculating malice that was more terrifying than pure animal instinct. The black, scary werewolf pulled itself up into the lantern room, and I got my first full view of it. It was over 8 feet tall, even in its hunched posture, with impossibly long arms that ended in clawed hands. Its body was corded with muscle beneath the dark fur, and it moved with a fluid grace that belied its size. I sprayed the fire extinguisher directly into its face, and it recoiled with a snarl that shook the glass panels of the lantern room. I didn't wait. I swung the metal canister with all my strength, connecting with the side of its head. The creature stumbled, and I hit it again, forcing it back toward the ladder opening. But it recovered quickly, faster than should have been possible. It lunged at me, and I barely managed to dodge, pressing myself against the curved glass wall. Its claws raked across the metal housing of the lens mechanism, leaving deep gouges in the steel. I was going to die. That certainty filled me with a strange calm. But if I was going to die, I was going to make this thing work for it. I grabbed one of the heavy maintenance tools from the cabinet, a large wrench, and faced the creature. That's when the night took an even darker turn. The creature stopped its attack and tilted its head, listening. The pack below had started making sounds, urgent, warning calls. And then I heard what they heard, the sound of a vehicle approaching, tires crunching on gravel. The black, scary werewolf turned its attention back to me, and for a moment, we locked eyes. What I saw there was worse than mindless hunger. There was recognition, understanding. It knew I'd seen it, really seen it, and I understood in that moment that I was marked. This wasn't over. The creature turned and descended the ladder with shocking speed. I heard it crash through the lighthouse, and seconds later, through the glass panels, I watched all four shapes melt into the darkness of the forest, disappearing as if they'd never been there. The vehicle that had arrived was a security patrol making their irregular rounds. I heard them calling up through the lighthouse, their voices concerned but unaware of what had just happened. I made my way down on shaking legs, past the destroyed hatch and the gouged walls, the evidence of what had occurred. When I reached them, I tried to explain, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. They saw the damage, saw the state I was in, and called the police. The investigation that followed found no rational explanation for the destruction. The claw marks were dismissed as vandalism with some kind of tool. The broken window was blamed on storm damage. My account was written off as the confused recollection of a man who'd been frightened by a break-in. But I know what I saw. What hunted me that night wasn't human, and it wasn't any natural animal. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist but does. And the worst part? 3 days later, I found scratch marks on my car door, the same pattern I'd seen gouged into the lighthouse metal. They know where I live. They remember me just as I remember them. I'm writing this as a warning and a record. If you ever visit the St. Augustine Lighthouse, don't go after dark. Don't stay when the staff leave. And if you hear something moving in those maritime forests, something that sounds too large and moves too deliberately, run. Run and don't look back, because they're still out there. The black, scary werewolf and its pack, hunting in the darkness around that lighthouse. And I have the terrible feeling that they're not done with me yet. Last night, I woke to the sound of scratching at my bedroom window. I live on the second floor,